Now I need to record. Sorry about that again. Okay. And so yeah, I'm just gonna let Truc take it away because I know she has a lot to cover. So go
Hi,
for it.
guys. So again, this is Truc Moore. I'm with the county counsel's office. I've been doing county contracting for pretty much the whole time I've been here, and pretty much I do a lot of the large IT procurements for the county. And I don't have one specific department that I actually handle all their IT contracts for. I actually handle IT contracts for pretty much most of the county departments at the county who have large software contracts and software issues. So I've worked for JCOT, I've worked for TTC, I've worked for DPW. They're actually one of my busiest clients right now. I've worked for CEO, for CEO risk management, DPSS. For those of you who are from DPSS, I did LRS, and now, of course, it's part of CalSols, and I'm still involved with all of that. So I've worked on a large number of IT procurements for the county, and there are other attorneys like me who do the same thing. And so today's lesson, if I think everyone can see my screen, right? We're going to do IT
Yes.
County Contracting 101, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the basics of contracting for software at the county. And now that I've you guys see what I look like and I've said hello, I'm actually going to turn my camera off because I do have trouble sometimes with the video freezing when I'm doing active presentations and folks are on. So let me go ahead and work on that. Okay, so I've turned that off. Okay, so I want to make sure everyone can see my screen. Perfect. All right. So let me see here. I'm concerned that I'm not able to advance the slide presentation. Okay, great. Here we go. So the objectives of today's presentation is for you guys to kind of leave with a basic understanding of what IT contracts are and what to look for when you're handling it, and to kind of show you, how IT is procured and the issues that you need to consider when you're handling an IT contract for the county. Okay. I want you guys to know that, there's a lot of nuances to IT contracting. And so today's presentation is really intended to kind of give you the basics, so that you know what to flag, but for you to work with your project team and obviously with your county counsel. And maybe it might be me one day, depending on, what kind of procurement you're working on and what kind of solution you're working on. Okay, so just a reminder, today is just the basics, but you're going to get a lot today, a lot of really good information. So what is IT? What is an IT contract? IT is not it. IT is short for information technology. Information technology is a term that's used pretty much in the kind of the software industry to describe any type of technology that's used to create, store, exchange, or use information electronically in its various forms. Okay. And an IT contract, either procures or buys that technology. Okay. So at the county, if you're hearing someone talking about a software contract or an IT contract, we're really talking about this type of contract that we're going to be discussing shortly, where we're looking at software to kind of help, move information electronically, or to exchange information, or to store information, or to interact and provide information to our constituents. Okay. Now, how do you identify an IT contract? Well, you start by figuring out, what is the county trying to procure? So if you see the column on the left-hand side, is the county trying to procure software? If it is, it's going to be an IT contract. If the county is trying to procure hardware with smart software in it, it's going to have an IT contract component in it. And when I say hardware with smart software, I'm talking about things like maybe really cool devices with really sophisticated software loaded into it, or maybe medical devices like at our hospitals, where there's going to be very sophisticated technology installed into it to help us take pictures of maybe the patients or, help us evaluate their conditions. Separately, if we're talking about, trying to procure internet services, that is an IT contract because those internet services are provided with an IT component. If we're talking about trying to procure a system or a solution to do something for us, that's an IT contract. We're talking about an IT contract. And if we're talking about procuring, support and maintenance for software or for our system or solution, hey, that's an IT contract as well. And if we're talking about, gosh, I need an e-commerce solution to help me, collect money or have, the public pay for things, that's an e-commerce solution and that's an IT contract. Okay. And so trying to identify what we're procuring will help you understand if what you're dealing with is really an IT contract. Separately, if the solution is being delivered a certain way, like if we're doing system development, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna go and tell my dog to go away real quick because she's barking. Actually, hopefully my kids will come and get the doggy. But if the solution is being developed through a system development contract, then that's an IT contract. If you guys are trying to buy a commercial off-the-shelf solution, that's what we call a COD solution, where you use it as is, or maybe there might be some customization or some configuration to it. Okay, that's an IT contract. And of course, everything these days, most of our software is delivered to us as a software as a service, as a SaaS solution, where it's actually hosted in the cloud and not on at the county on our premises. And I think a lot of you probably have experienced that with that. And then of course, all the cloud-based stuff, that's an IT contract. And if you've got an existing solution or existing software that you need an update or an upgrade to, that is going to require you to procure that through an IT contract as well. And so I kind of wanted to focus on this because I wanted to make sure that everyone understood what you're looking for. If you see things like system development, internet services, maintenance and support, e-commerce, SaaS, cloud-based solutions, upgrading, updating software, you really are talking about an IT contract. So that should kind of help you, focus on what you're working with. So I want to stop there. Does anyone have any questions about what I've identified as things that would fall under an IT contract? I want to make sure that everyone's clear, based on these things, that we're really talking about procuring these types of things through an IT contract. Any questions? Okay, great. Perfect. So let's keep going. So how do you procure IT? How do you procure information technology? Well, you'd be really surprised. At the county, the IT procurement process is kind of similar and is like the same as other procurements that we do for professional services and sometimes for goods, depending on what we're buying. Sometimes we buy things that are a standard solution. That's a COD solution that we're able to run like an IFB. And so the types of procurements that we have used in the past to procure IT includes, a request for bids, so RFBs. We've used a request for proposals. We've actually used IFBs. And we've also run purchase order procurements where after we run the IFB, ISC runs the IFB or the RFB, ISC awards the purchase order. So depending on what you're procuring and how much implementation services there are associated with installing the solution or using the solution, ISD may be able to procure it for you under its purchasing agent authority. And if ISD is not able to do it under its purchasing agent authority, where you can cut a PO, you would run the competitive solicitation. And then, of course, you would go to the board for approval and award. And so that process, again, is very similar to how you would handle other procurements for goods or goods and services. Okay, so The processes are pretty the same, but the things that go into that procurement are different, and the things that go into the contract are different. Now, this is kind of the IT procurement process. You know, the client department will identify at the planning stage what their IT needs are, and then they'll work within the department and with their county counsel to determine what the proper procurement method is. And sometimes a sole source is possible depending on what you're procuring and if there are others who provide that solution or not. Okay, and of course, if you pursue a sole source, then obviously there will have to be a sole source review. And then you need to determine at what stage of the process the CIO should be engaged. Usually the CIO requires now that they be able to review and approve the solicitation before it goes out. And then, of course, they have to issue a CIO analysis of the contract award after this procurement is done and the contract has been negotiated. And then, so from the planning phase, you'll get into the solicitation phase, and depending on, you know, which approach you take, like I said, you could do a purchase order approach through ISD. You could do an RFSQ approach. You can do an RFI, RFP approach, and, you know, you would be surprised. We actually have existing agreements, including master agreements, where county departments can actually provide solutions already. Usually those solutions are held by, those master agreements are either held by the ISD or the CIO, and you're able to just, you know, issue, either a purchase order under it or an ordering agreement, and you can buy off of it because some department has already run a countywide solution. Now, if you are running a solicitation yourself, IT contracts are, especially the larger ones, are generally negotiated. And so you want to make sure that you provide time so that the agreement is negotiated. Sometimes, you know, I have a client department that, you know, a lot of our county contracts are not negotiated. It's kind of a take it or leave it, right? And the client doesn't build in time or room for contract negotiations. And so you need to do that, but you'll know right off the bat when you're working with your county counsel if you're gonna have a type of contract where you're gonna need to provide time and room for negotiations. You should also know that during the negotiation phase, a lot of times, you know, depending on what's being negotiated, you're gonna need to get solicit input from the CIO or the data privacy officer or CEO risk management, or, you know, your privacy folks inside the department, right? To make sure that what's being negotiated isn't impacting the rules and procedures that are in place at the departments. You should also know that, you know, once you complete negotiations, depending on what process you use, you know, if you went through ISD and ISD was able to procure it for you, then a purchase order would be issued. The great thing about going through ISD is if it fits within their purchasing agent authority, you do not have to go to the board of supervisors for approval. Unfortunately, ISD is not able to procure all IT solutions because sometimes the service component of the IT solution, where they have to implement the system, requires a lot of configuration work or maybe customization work. And that results in the services component being larger than 30% of the contract. So if that's the case, then you're going to have to do a board letter and go to the board and seek the board's approval of award of that IT contract. Now, if you're lucky enough to find an existing agreement or a master agreement that has the IT solution that you're looking for, then fantastic. A work order would be issued under that master agreement, and you do not need to go to the board for approval. Okay, so depending on what solicitation process you use and whether it can be done under the purchasing agent or if you're using an existing master agreement, you may not have to go to the board. But otherwise, for the most part, you're going to the board. Okay. Now, what should be included in an IT contract? The rest of our presentation is going to focus really heavily on what needs to be included in an IT contract, because as we discussed earlier, The procurement process itself is very similar in the sense that it follows the regular procurement process of other standard goods and services. Of course, your statement of work is going to be different because it's going to be more software related. You're going to have obviously business and technical requirements that are going to be attached. You're going to spec out, right, the things that are you want in your solution. But the IT contract is really, really important. And the IT contract is always included in the procurement at the time that it's released, because it tells the vendor what we're looking for and what we expect out of that IT solution. And the IT agreements have a lot more provisions than the typical professional services agreements that you guys deal with, because obviously the IT solutions have to cover the software, right? The work that's related to the software. And that's what we're gonna go over today. Now, I'm hearing an echo. Are you guys hearing an echo? Is anyone hearing an echo? Okay, great. The echo went away. Okay, so the agreement, development of the agreement. So the development of the agreement always starts at the planning stage of the procurement process for an IT procurement, right? You are dealing with the IT agreement right at the beginning, and you're often working with your county counsel on that IT agreement. As I discussed previously, the agreement has to be included in the solicitation when you put it out in the street. Do not put out a procurement. And of course, we don't put out any procurements where we don't have the contract attached. So except in a purchase order solicitation, which is a little bit different. Okay, you must assess and create specific requirements for the solution that you're looking for. So there really isn't a one size fits all exemplar, that you can just copy and paste from. Sometimes you can take a couple of exemplars and kind of blend what you're looking for, but oftentimes, you're going to start with an exemplar and you're going to create what's needed for your specific solution. There is no one size fits all, okay, for an IT agreement. You're going to have to develop a statement of work. You're going to have business and technical requirements that are specific to your solution, and you're going to have service level requirements. And we'll talk about what those service level requirements are, which is pretty much, what do you expect? How often do you expect the solution to be up? What do you expect, in the realm of maintenance and support? Okay, all of that has to be, in your agreement. There is an IT contracts checklist at ISC's procurement intranet page, and I'll give you guys the link for where you can find exemplars. And you can start with that, but I don't want you to think that checklist is the end all be all of what needs to be in your agreement. They've tried to standardize something to help the departments, but working within your project team and with your county counsel, you're going to be able to fully develop the agreement. But the checklist is a great place to start. But it's not, again, it doesn't have all the specific requirements because it depends on the IT solution that's being procured. Now, when you are developing the agreement, you want to look at one of the first issues you want to look at is the IP issue. And IP stands for intellectual property rights, right? IP, the intellectual property. You want to ask yourself, is the county seeking a license to use the IT solution, or are they trying to own the IT solution? So what is the difference between the two? And it's important to know what the county's position is on the solution because it dictates what goes into the contract. So if we are seeking a license, that means we're not trying to own the solution. We're just trying to use it, right? To get permission to use it for our purposes, but other people can use it too, right? So in these license scenario, the county seeks a license where we seek permission. Most of the things that we buy for use in the IT world, we seek a license to use. Most commercial off-the-shelf stuff, most SaaS solutions, we use a license. We seek permission for our use. And so when you're dealing with the license, you want to look inside your department and ask, well, how long are you guys expecting to use the solution for? Because the license is specific to a number of years. A lot of our IT contract licenses are usually 7 years. It's kind of like the standard. It's usually 5 years for an initial term and 2 option years. And then we do have some solutions where it takes so long to either build it, or the solution is so complex that we don't want to keep changing it out after 7 years. So we have some IT contracts that are like 10 years, but it's rare. It's usually about 7 years. And the reason for that is because technology develops very quickly, right? Every year. And you don't want to be locked into a really long-term agreement, so that you're not re-procuring and refreshing your technology. And sometimes when you have such a long agreement, you're not refreshing and you're not out there looking at the most recent and up-to-date technology. So 7 years, which is 5 initial and 2 option years, is the typical term. And then for the license, you want to look at, how's the license structured? Is it like an enterprise-wide license where you just buy one big enterprise license and it doesn't matter how many people use it, like in your department or at the county, it's all one price? Or the license may be limited in number, right? It may be limited to a certain number of users, or it may be limited to, a computer. Maybe the license is only good for 10 computers, or maybe the license is only good for 50 users. And you want to make sure that you understand the license restrictions on that, because sometimes at the county, right, and it's not just the county, it's a lot of people who use software, they exceed the scope of their license. Like maybe they buy one license for a computer and they accidentally or inadvertently, because they don't know or forgot, installed one license on like 10 computers. Okay. Or maybe we bought licenses by the number of users, and we only bought 40 licenses for users, and we accidentally let 100 users use, the software. So you have to look at the license structure and figure out what your needs are, and to make sure that what you include in the agreement, when you put it out on the street, makes sense. And of course, depending on what you buy, the license should be perpetual. Unless you're buying a SaaS solution, it's going to be more subscription based, which means it's going to be more limited in term. Now, a lot of people ask me these days, well, we lose our right to use licenses. So give me an example of a perpetual license. And I always like to use the example of Microsoft Office. I think, and I hope that's not the case anymore, but I think there was a time when it was like 2020, and we were still, some of our departments were still using Microsoft Office 2013. So that's an example where we have a license to use Microsoft Office, right? And we bought it, and we can keep using it forever, that version, and we don't get upgrades, but we can use that version. So that's an example where we have a perpetual license. But these days, most of our technology, the license is like limited in term and it's subscription based. And of course, you got to make sure that, depending on the license, what you're procuring, you want to make sure that the license is broad enough to cover you and possibly any vendor or entity that also needs to use that license. And the best example I want to provide, and I've got a couple of agreements that I'm working on right now that follow this, but the best example I can provide you is, I worked on a contract with Public Works before, and Public Works procured a construction system, right, to bid out work. And they wanted their jock contractors to be able to use that system so that they can use the same price book, and then they can track change orders and follow the progress of construction and the solution. And so when we worked on that procurement, and that procurement is actually right now on the street, we needed to make sure that the license was clear, that it would cover the county and that it would cover our job contractors. And so we were buying a license for ourselves and for all the people that we were requiring them to use our system. So that's an example when I say you want to make sure your license is broad enough to cover the county, but any entity that you may be requiring, any vendor, right, who may need to use the solution. All right. So we're continuing on the IP issue. So I said you want to discover or figure out if you're dealing with a license or if you're dealing with ownership. Sometimes the county may seek to own the IT solution or system that we're buying. This usually comes up when we want someone to build from scratch a brand new solution that doesn't exist or that meets our needs. In those instances, and we don't do that very often anymore for this reason in bullet point number 2, because it's very, very, very expensive to do that. We're paying somebody to build it and then hand it to us. And then, separately, I want to add, when we own our solutions, we are required to update our solutions. And so in the past, I've had county departments, they start out building the solution and then they don't stay abreast on, implementing security changes to it to make it robust. They're not able to add, additional functionality or whatever to it. And so their system kind of over a couple years kind of becomes stagnant because they're not investing in the infrastructure the way that a company that's in the business of selling the solution again and again, is doing. And so just keep that in mind. I mean, it's very rare now that I see contracts where the county is trying to own the solution, but it could exist. Okay, so we're teaching that it's possible. But most of the stuff you're going to see is in the prior slide that I showed you, which talks about licensing. We license most of our IT solutions now. Okay. Most importantly, though, in whatever manner we're looking in intellectual property, depending on whether we're licensing and owning, we need to always be able to own our data that we put into a system, and we need to be able to move our data easily in and out of that system, because the last thing that you want is to input all your data into the system for 7, 8 years, whatever. And at the time that you need to get rid of the vendor because you're reprocuring a new solution, you're somehow you're locked and you didn't walk away with your data. Now, we have a lot of contract language in our boilerplates that deal with that, and that our county data is owned by us, and so if you're using the correct templates, that information, that those contracts provisions will be in there. But I think it's really important that, you have a working understanding that when it comes to county data, that the data must be able to be returned back to the county or easily moved. And, especially in the situations where you use a vendor and after a few years they suck and, you want to fire them and terminate their contract and move somebody else, you want to be able to take your data and move it. So just keep in mind, no matter what type of agreement you want to enter, you want to make sure that we can move our data easily. Now, as you're developing the agreement, you're going to have to develop the statement of work. The statement of work is really, really important in any county contract, but in the IT contract, it's extra important because it spells out what you expect the vendor to do for the solution. Are you expecting the vendor to come in and meet with you and your business folks and then capture your technical and business requirements and then automate it in the system? Or are you expecting them, to just load it up and give you a portal and then you'll be able to just log in and you're going to use their solution as is, right? But the statement of work is very important because it spells out what your expectation is for them to do the work and how you expect them to meet the requirements and what kind of testing you're going to require, whether you're going to require testing with a big group of folks or a little bit of folks. And, your SOW is also going to detail whether you require them to train your staff or your department on how to use the solution. And, that training is really important because sometimes we have agreements where we do train the trainer, where we want them to train like 5 folks. And then those 5 folks go out and train the department. And then we also have agreements where the solution is so sophisticated that we want them to train our folks directly. Okay. And your statement of work is going to spell that out. So in your IT agreement, make sure that you are spelling out the statement of work. And of course, like I said, this agreement is going to be in your procurement. And so the vendors are going to be looking to your statement of work to see what kind of work you're requiring of them so that they can bid and put the price accordingly, and submit the correct bid price. Okay. So as you're developing your statement of work, you're going to say, what's needed for implementation. And a really key component in your statement of work, you should have and what we call in the IT world acceptance. And we use it at the county IT on our county IT contracts, because sometimes my vendors, and maybe they're faking it, when I tell them, hey, we're gonna go through a process to accept your system, and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm gonna build you the system, you're gonna test it, and once it passes testing, you're gonna pay me and you're gonna use it. And our process is a little bit more, detailed than that. We like to have acceptance in our software systems for the county. Sometimes that acceptance is known as final system acceptance on our larger IT implementations, but acceptance means, the county is not going to pay to use the software product until one, it's been installed, two, it passes all the required testing, three, it meets all the county's requirements, and four, it's been formally accepted by the county, usually after it's been used for a period of time and there's been no errors or deficiencies, right? And so it's kind of a multi-step final sign-off process, and I think it's really, really important because the software vendors oftentimes try and get you to pay early when all of these steps haven't been met yet, and in our agreements, especially on our very large IT procurements, it's very clear that there's an acceptance process. A lot of vendors have trouble with that, but on many of our procurements, especially the large ones, we always get final system acceptance processes in place, okay, before we actually start, payment of our license or our subscription or whatever. There are some IT solutions, guys, where it's doing so much stuff. There's so much, functionality being incorporated, and there's different parts of the system that we might have phased acceptance, right? Like, here's a great example. If I've got a system that's supposed to, cut a check, and that same system is then supposed to do budgeting, and then that same system is supposed to take the budgeting and, generate more invoices. Sometimes departments say, I need the solution to cut the check right away because we got to get checks out, right? And the other portions can wait. That's an example where we can have a phased acceptance where we're going to test to make sure that it's cutting checks correctly. And then, we move to the next part of the process and we have a phased acceptance of the next solution. You should always set a date for acceptance contractually in the agreement, and you should have delay credits tied to that. And, you might ask yourself, well, what do you mean by that? Well, if I've got a system that needs to be implemented, I want to make sure that that system is going to be coming in at like 18 months or 24 months or whatever I agree to in my project control document, right? So you want to set a date, an end goal, because otherwise, if you don't, they could take 5 years to implement the system, right? You want to have a date that they need to finish their work. And you want to tie delay credits to it, which means for every day that you're late on something, I'm going to charge you a credit and I'm going to back it out of what I owe you. So you got to do that, because other than that, they'll never be able to deliver your solution on time. I also want you to know that the CIO, who always does a CIO analysis of all IT contracts, they will always ask, what does your acceptance look like? And do you have delay credits attached to it? Okay. Because they want to know that there's something helping to push close, the work and making it timely. Now, there's some times where, an actual acceptor process is not feasible. That's more standard in a COD software product, where it's kind of a commercial off-the-shelf product, but there's still a testing phase where you load it and you test it and then you agree it works and then you quote unquote accept it. But it's not going to be as attenuated as a regular process for a larger IT implementation, where they're going to be doing configuration work for you. But keep that in mind. Try and always have an acceptance process when you're dealing with software. All right. Your agreement should also have warranties. You should have warranty language where they provide your product or software warranty that it's going to perform in accordance with the documentation and the specifications. And if they don't meet that warranty requirement, they got to give us our money back, or they got to come and fix it. So you always want to make sure that there is a product warranty for this solution that they're giving you. You also want to try and write in, warranty, system compatibility warranties, where they have to warrant that the solution they're giving you is going to work with the systems that you want it to work with. We buy a lot of systems at the county, we license, a lot of systems at the county where those systems have to interface or integrate with other solutions. And it would be horrible if after 18 months of working on this huge implementation, right, when it goes to connect with another system, there's all of these issues. And so you want to make sure that there is, system compatibility warranties. And then, we often put in our agreements intellectual property rights warranties, where we say that they own the rights in the IT solution and they have the rights to let us use it or to license it. Because the last thing you want to do is sign a deal with Jack, and it turns out that the solution is owned by Jane and Jane is suing Jack, right? Because depending on what's at issue, the owner of the IP could go seek an injunction and stop our use of the solution because the vendor didn't have the proper rights or is infringing on their solution. And of course, if there's someone sues the county for infringement because we're using the solution, we want to be able to turn around to the vendor and say, I had this warranty and for IP and you didn't meet it, so you're in breach of warranty. Okay, that would be one of our contract remedies. All right, what else needs to be in your agreement? So we discussed that, IT agreements really move data, right? At the beginning, they're electronically handling or sharing data. Well, at the county, if you're dealing with county information, county data, you need to include confidentiality, security, and data provisions. There's certain county information, and we define it very broadly, where it's confidential, and the vendors have to keep it confidential. And the good news is since in the last couple of years, CIO, along with the chief privacy officer at the county, has developed an information security and privacy requirements exhibit. And they require that it be attached to all IT agreements. Now, the boilerplate for this exhibit is very extensive, and there will be some duplication, or depending on how sophisticated your IT agreement is, there may be a lot of duplication with your main agreement. And so when you're working with this exhibit, you want to determine if you have duplicative clauses with your main agreement. And of course, you're going to be consulting with your county counsel. But for all IT agreements, even IT agreements that are cut as purchase orders, the county requires that you use some form and variation of this IT information security and privacy requirements exhibit. This exhibit is available on ISD's contracting intranet page. Okay, and then where appropriate, you may want to require the vendor's employees and their subcontractors to sign individual confidentiality agreements. Now, all of our contracts for IT require that the vendor obviously be responsible for their subs and their employees and everybody that they bring to do work under us, including, making sure that they follow the confidentiality requirements, right? But there are some agreements where we really want to remind people that it's really, really important that they sign, that the employees understand that there are significant confidentiality obligations, and we make them sign and their own individual confidentiality agreements, reminding them of this. And, the best example that I can think of is, we have this big county system that manages all of the county claims that come in and that can result from a lawsuit. And that means that could include all of our slip and falls, our workers' comps, and everything. And so that vendor, has access to that information as they're moving data through the system for us. And we require that vendor's employees to also individually sign the confidentiality agreements, because that data is so sensitive that we want them to understand and be reminded that they also have an individual obligation. But we do have agreements where the county department is comfortable saying, here's the confidentiality requirement, and you, vendor, you're responsible to make sure that your employees and your subs follow those requirements. Okay. Now, sometimes you guys should know when we require confidentiality of the vendor will come back and say, oh, you're worried about your stuff. Well, what about my stuff? And you guys got to understand that mutual confidentiality with a government entity is not the same, because we're subject to the Public Records Act. Okay. And depending on what's being shared with us, we are required to provide it under the Public Records Act. Now, the vendor, if they believe their information is trade secret or confidential, right, they can mark it as that. And then when if it falls under a PRA that comes in, then we'll stop and say, oh, I see it's marked confidential, and then we'll evaluate it to see if it's trade secret and work with the vendor. But just be careful, because sometimes the vendors think, oh, if you're going to make me have confidentiality arrangement, I'm going to make you have the same. And oftentimes it's not the same, because by law, there are certain things we are required to disclose. And so we can't offer them the same confidentiality that we would otherwise require of them. All right. So you also got to know that confidential security and data requirements are also system specific, because depending on what you're procuring, right, your requirements may be a little different. Like, for example, if you're procuring a solution that is handling credit cards, you're going to have a lot of additional requirements about data security for financial data and use of credit cards and, PCI and things like that. But if you are dealing with a system where, the only information that you're moving through there, is, let me get, what's a very simple one? Is, notices to the public information. And the information is supposed to send out public information to the public so that they get it countywide. That's not going to need as stringent data requirements, right? And so when we say that it's specific to the IT solution, we really need you to be able to evaluate and understand what kind of data you're moving through the system. I can tell you from my clients, when I work on a matter, one of the first things I ask them in an IT procurement I'm working on is, tell me what kind of data you're moving through the system. What kind of data is it housing? Is it got birthdays, names, minor information, health information, tax information, tax ID information, social security numbers? Those are the things that, really make me perk up, because those are things that I know we're going to make sure, I have to make sure has the very stringent data requirements applying. You should also consider whether you're going to allow any work or data to be performed outside of the United States. Our general rule is all work, right, and data has to reside in the United States. But some work may be permitted, but it's on a case-by-case basis. But generally, we like our data to be housed in the United States, because in the event of a data breach, it's much easier to fly to Idaho and have somebody arrested than it is to go to, Cambodia or Russia, or the Philippines or whatever, and get those folks arrested, right? And so it's very, very important that when you're working on an IT solution, that you evaluate if you're going to be permitted to let work occur out of the United States. Now, I've worked on some procurements where the client department recognizes a cost savings by having trouble tickets like the help desk handled in another country like India or the Philippines. And in those instances where that occurs, we restrict it so that they're not getting access to live data. They're just taking the trouble ticket, and so I'm giving you that example because I want you to understand that for the most part, we like work to be in the United States, all of the work. And if we're going to permit it to go overseas, you guys have to do a very specific analysis to understand what's being done overseas, is live data being exchanged, and what the security protocols are. Okay. You just cannot just let things work to occur out of the United States, and you have no understanding why it's necessary or what's being shared. All right. That is a no-no. So please keep that in mind. But we know these days there's a lot of solutions where, they go to India. India is a favorite place of large corporations to go right now because the labor is very sophisticated and very cheap. And even in those instances, we have not allowed live, real data to go to India. Okay, we usually do dummy data, and then they have to have all of the security protocols, to be able to handle the work. So very, very, very important. And of course, background checks. You got to, depending on your solution, you got to figure out if you're going to require a higher background check for the vendor staff. Because, for example, I'll draw my LRS example, which is leader replacement system that used to process all of our benefits, monetary benefits, and food benefits for our most needy residents in the county of Los Angeles. We required the vendor to do background checks to make sure that those folks did not have felonies or had been gotten in trouble for moral turpitude or fraud, because they have access to the system and it's moving benefits, and benefits information and printing, identifying, right, who's eligible for what and how many benefits, what, the amounts of benefits. And so those are kind of good examples of where, depending on what the solution is, you might need a higher stringent background check than, a solution that, all it does is like pass out public information, right? So just keep that in mind that when it comes to the background checks on an IT solution, you have to ask yourself, do I need a higher increased protocol? Because they have access to the network, they have access to the software, they have access to county data. Okay. You should also consider if the data that you're handling, if it's HIPAA data, that's covered under HIPAA. Any vendor that handles protected health information, PHI, has to sign a county business associate agreement, a BAA. I'm sure you guys have heard of the word PHI, BAA, HIPAA, they all go together. And the great news is on ISD's procurement website, they have boilerplates, and we have boilerplates in our contracts on how to deal with PHI, HIPAA, and the BAA agreements. And the BAA is literally an exemplar that is available to everyone, and you can attach it if you determine that you've got, PHI information that's being passed through. Sometimes, even if they're not going to be handling in PHI, they might have inadvertent access. We have a separate contract clause that deals with inadvertent access. Luckily, it's in the boilerplate as well. Okay, so that's available for you there, and it's maintained by ISD. Now, why am I telling you all of this about inadvertent access, BAA, PHI? I'm telling you this because I'm highlighting to you the importance of understanding what kind of data is being housed in your IT system. And you should, if you don't know if you're working on an IT procurement and you don't know what kind of data is being housed in your system, you better go figure it out, because what kind of data in the system triggers, right? What kind of provisions need to be included, right? It leads to that larger discussion of all the things that we're talking about. Are you going to let it go overseas? Are you going to require more stringent background checks? Are you going to throw in a BAA agreement? Very, very, very important. If you're working on an IT procurement, you should always be able to answer what kind of data is being housed in the system. And again, just reiterating, every IT system is very data specific. There's no one size that fits all. So you just got to make sure that you understand what's being housed in the system. And then from there, it'll lead to the proper discussions. And you got to be able to answer your county counsel's question when he or she calls and says, can you tell me what kind of data is a very secure? I mean, is it very sensitive data? Is it public information? Is there individual information? Is there personal health information? Is there personal information, PI, right? You got to understand what's being in there because again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's very important because it leads to all of these other provisions. All right. Now that, we kind of went through the data piece, you got your solution in place, your agreement, your contract should have provisions about how to maintain the IT solution because you don't want to just buy something and then you maintain it yourself. Usually the vendor will help you maintain it. They'll give you updates, upgrades, software patches, security patches. They'll fix stuff if the system goes down. You want them to be able to handle it. And so you want to make sure that your IT agreement has provisions about how the solution is supposed to be maintained and who do you call if something goes wrong and how long and what are they supposed to do when you call them. And you want to tie money to it, okay? You want to have service levels, especially for SaaS products where they're hosting it. They're pretty much doing everything for you. So if it goes down, you want to be able to say, hey, it went down and I wasn't able to use it, so I should get money back, right? So I think it's really important. And even to this day, the client departments will send me an agreement and it's got no SLAs in it. It doesn't have an uptime requirement of 99.5% or 99% even, which is very low, but it doesn't have an SLA. And I asked the client, I don't understand. What is your remedy if the system goes down and you don't have access to it for 2 weeks? What is your remedy? And they're like, well, the vendor didn't provide that. And I'm like, you better go back and ask the vendor what's going on. And you're going to tell them that they have to have an uptime of 99.5%. Right. And so in the example that I highlighted, it usually came across in like a sole source. Right. And the vendor didn't give them anything. But if you're putting stuff out on the street, my suggestion is you always set it at least at like 99.5 to 99.9% uptime. And then you say, for every percentage that you're down below that, I get 10% back of the monthly fee or 20% back or 50% back. And then, of course, if you're down like 3 days or something, I get like all my money back, right? But those are things that you want to negotiate because if you don't penalize them for the system being down, they will have no urgency to bring the system back up for you. And you're trying to use it, right? You're trying to use it. Your other employees in your department are trying to use it and the system is down and all work is done through that system. So always make sure that you have requirements for maintaining the system and that you have service levels that they're supposed to meet. And then as part of maintaining the solution, you want to make sure, especially for SaaS solutions, you want to make sure that you're getting regular updates and upgrades as part of the fees that you're paying to use the SaaS solution. Because you don't want to be, in 2024 putting in a new solution and they don't give you regular software updates and it's a 7-year contract because 7 years from now, you may be stuck with the original system that you had. You should be getting regular updates and upgrades as part of the fees that you're paying. Now, some vendors try and break it out and say, no, I don't want to software updates or upgrades are an additional cost, try and negotiate out of that. You want to get regular software updates and upgrades when you put in a solution. Okay. All right. And then, you got to make sure that in your IT agreement that you have termination rights. And if the system doesn't work correctly or stops working after a year or two, or the vendor never gets the system off the ground, you want to make sure that you have termination rights so that we can get out of the contract and we can terminate them for breach, or we can maybe terminate them for convenience. Maybe their solution works great, but it sucks because there's another vendor that we found out, who just came out with something new and we want to use them. Okay. So you always want to make sure you have termination rights for breach and convenience. Software vendors love to say that we don't have a right to terminate the contract for convenience. Don't fall for that. Your county counsel is not going to let you fall for that. We don't take out termination convenience rights for the county, because sometimes we want to say we want to move on to another solution. Okay. And we don't want to be stuck using their same solution because something else, we've discovered something else is better. Or sometimes, the board may say, hey, I'm paying for 10 software systems. I want us to buy one system that does all 10 things. How are you going to get out of that contract if you don't have a termination for convenience provision in those agreements? So make sure those are included. And of course, if something isn't right, we want to be able to get out. And depending on how we structure pricing, it may be that we want to pay monthly or maybe quarterly. But a lot of times now the software vendors like us to pay yearly. And I hate that, but sometimes that's the reality of the vendor and the market that I'm dealing with. Because when you pay yearly and you terminate, 6 months in, right? They oftentimes, it makes it very difficult to get that money back. But whereas if you're paying monthly or quarterly, you're paying as you go, and it's not as much money out the bat. So if you can structure the pricing so that you can break it up monthly or quarterly or yearly, I think that's a great idea to try and do that. Okay. What else should be in the contract? Oh my gosh, you got to make sure that the IT agreement has indemnity and insurance requirement. And so what is indemnity? You want to make sure that the agreement has general indemnity requirements where if the vendor messes up and a third party sues us, we want to be able to go to the vendor and say, hey, you messed up. And because you messed up, I got sued. So you're going to have to pay for my defense and take care of this problem. And we want that, we want that because we didn't do anything wrong. They did something wrong. And so general indemnity requirements are always included in all county contracts, including in our IT contracts. And then you also, very importantly, you want to include intellectual property indemnity requirements. IP indemnity is not generally included in our general professional services contracts, but they are for our IT contracts, because if we get sued for using a solution that they gave us and someone and that lawsuit says we copyright infringe or we trademark infringe or we violated somebody's patent by using that software, we're going to say, hey, we got that solution from you. You have to cover me in the lawsuit. And so you want to make sure that you also have your IP indemnity requirements. And in the IT contract, you want to make sure that you have the proper limits of insurance and the proper types of insurance. So there is, in the IT world, we have technical E&O insurance, we have professional liability insurance, we have cyber insurance, we have cyber crimes insurance, and so depending on what the system does and the type of data that's in the system, it will trigger additional insurance requirements that are not typically required in a general contract for widgets or professional services, right? That are non-IT related. And, again, the ability to make sure that you include the right requirements, guys, is based on you having a good understanding of what the system does, right? And what is required from the vendor. Because, you know, if you know that the vendor is being required to, you know, configure a portion of the system or to build a new customized module for you in that solution, then you better believe that we're going to have professional liability and technical E&O insurance, okay, errors and omissions insurance. And of course, you know, if we're going to have cyber insurance on all of our IT contracts, especially if there's data being housed, you know, sensitive data being housed in there, there's a risk of a privacy breach. Okay, you got to make sure, and this is always going to be the case with all of you county contracts. CO risk management is often consulted on the limits that are required in an IT contract. There are also special rules on the amounts of the limits. So for cyber liability, they've updated their insurance manual to give you an understanding of how much cyber insurance you're required to have. At minimum, you're always going to have at least 2 million at minimum. So if you ever look at an agreement, a procurement, and it says $1 million, it's wrong. It's at minimum 2 million. But that procurement with the insurance, cyber insurance limit, should not have gone out on the street until after the department has discussed with risk management what the proper level of insurance is. And they've got this great formula now where they calculate, well, how big is the company, how many, you know, how much data is being housed by individual, and how many instances of individual data is in there. And then they kind of multiply it together. And then it's, you know, they have limits where it's 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. There's some where it's like 50 million. All right. Because it was so much sensitive data that if there was a leak, there would have been a massive liability. And so I want you guys to know that, you know, on your IT contracts, even before you can put it out as part of the procurement, you got to be running stuff through risk management. All right. What else? What else in the agreement? So when you're negotiating the agreement, sometimes as part of the proposal package, a vendor will strike out the entire county agreement and say, no, you got to use my agreement. Or you're negotiating a sole source and you're dealing with the vendor, and the vendor says, I'm not signing the county contract. You're signing my contract. Well, the answer to that is no. Okay. Every vendor that does work with the county, every contractor that does work with the county is going to sign the county contract. That county contract may look a little different, you know, depending on what's negotiated, but they start with our contract. Okay. So a county contract has to be used. It has to be prepared. Okay. Now, if there are vendor provisions that they give us that are specific to their solution and we've negotiated and we agree it has to be incorporated, it can be incorporated into the base agreement or it can be incorporated as an attachment to the agreement. But they always should be starting with our agreement. And so don't ever fall into the trap where you're signing their agreement. And now sometimes if you're doing a sole source and, you know, it's a standard solution, they'll want you to sign their agreement. And we don't really permit that. It has to be attached to a purchase order. I literally just dealt with a purchase order today for a client department where the vendor sent their own agreement. And I was like, I don't understand this. What is this agreement? And they're like, oh, they want to attach it to our purchase order. And I said, oh, okay. All right, well, let's negotiate the provisions that make sense. And then we took out the ones that were duplicative, and then we made it an exhibit to the purchase order. Okay, so that's an example where, you know, you could negotiate it out, but we don't take wholesale their agreement. Okay, we don't take it. And then depending on what happens, no matter what happens, there are county standard provisions and board policy provisions that always have to be included. And if you're just using their standard agreement, well, guess what? Their standard agreement doesn't have our board policy provisions and our standard contracting provisions in it. And so you would be violating the board policy, and depending on, what's left out, you might be violating some of like local law provisions that are covered in our county ordinances for our contracts. Okay. So make sure you're using our agreement, and if you have to incorporate their provisions, that you're incorporating the things that you agree with. Okay. What other IT considerations do you need for IT contracts? Well, you got to remember that if you're working on an IT procurement and IT contract, it's got to be also reviewed and approved by the CIO, the Chief Information Office. And they have to do a CIO analysis and at the end if it's awarded. And so why am I telling you this? Well, because sometimes my client departments forget that the CIO has to review their procurement before it goes out on the street. And so they didn't build time in for the CIO to review it before they put it out. Okay. Sometimes the CIO will say, I only need to see the statement of work. And sometimes the CIO will say, no, I need to see a lot more. Right. And they're rushing me. And I sign off on it. And then they say, I'm putting it out tomorrow. And we're like, whoa. The CIO hasn't seen it. And then the CIO is busy because they review a lot of IT procurements, right? He can't get to it for like 2 months, right? And so they didn't understand that was required. So just please keep in mind, your solicitation before it goes out on the street is often the CIO is required to review it. And then once you're done with your solicitation, you've done your award, everything like that. You want to go to the board. Well, even before you can go to the board, the CIO has to do a CIO analysis. And the CIO analysis, usually they will need your whole board letter package and the completed negotiated contract, with all the pricing so that they can review it and see if there are issues. And that process, sometimes they need up to 3 months to do that CIO analysis. So just make sure that you build that review time in, because the CIO, she likes to review that on the front end before it goes out on the street. And they like to review it on the back end before it goes to the board. And the board's policies require that for an IT system, depending on whether it's a new system or even a new amendment, there has to be a CIO analysis where the CIO has to actually mark on the board letter if he recommends award of the IT contract by the board. Okay. And you don't want him to mark no, so just keep that in mind. Make sure that you have time. And then you should know, right? You guys have your departmental county councils that you work with who do the day-to-day stuff. But depending on your IT solution, how big it is, if it's complicated, or there might be a potential protest, or, you're doing something new, you might also need to work with a county council that is responsible for IT contracts. You might need to work with somebody like me along with, your regular county council. I can tell you right now that I've got a number of procurements that I'm working on for DPW, one in particular, one for DCFS, where their county councils are involved because their county councils know the day-to-day legal work of what, their departments do, or the day-to-day nuances of their actual work. And I got pulled in because I'm going to handle the IT side of it, and to make sure that we have a balanced approach so that we're picking up the departmental operations. We have both folks working, right? And so make sure that if you've got a feeling that your procurement is very sophisticated, very complicated, high dollar, maybe there might be a protest, maybe you're changing out a vendor who's going to be pissed that, you're changing them out after they've had your contract for 7 years or 10 years or whatever, right? Chances are it's very likely that your a special IT county counsel is going to be pulled in to assist as well. And of course, the level of review that for any contract depends on what it's for. If I'm looking at I don't very often, but if I'm looking at a $40,000 contract, that level of review is going to be a little bit different from like a $20 million contract, and don't send a $20 million contract to your county council and expect that, they're going to review it as fast as maybe a $40,000 contract. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And, make sure that you flag the issues that you have to, for if you see issues that with your regular advice county counsel, that where you want like a more sophisticated IT person to also assist, make sure that you talk to them and ask them, hey, is there someone else that can also assist us with this? Okay. But your advice county counsel will know pretty much when they want to pull in, additional assistance. Okay. But always ask that, hey, is this something you want to handle, or do we need to build a team? And then sometimes the procurements are so large or so interesting or so unique that we also bring on an outside counsel who is also an IT lawyer, okay, to help out as well. So just keep that in mind. And be prepared to answer questions, due diligence questions like, what kind of data is this? How secure is it? Is this sole source proper? Do we need to increase background requirements? Have a good working understanding of what you're buying, because it really is going to drive what needs to be in the contract. Okay. All right. Where can you find exemplars? You can find exemplars of the checklist on ISD's procurement services website. I don't know if you guys have seen it. They recently redid it and it's beautiful. And there's a lot of things in there, including, our model contracts. There is unfortunately not a model IT contract because they are usually developed very specifically. But depending on what you're working on, you can start with a standard solution, or I'm sorry, a standard contract, and then work your way. And then depending on, if you've worked on other procurements before, or the lawyer that you're working with, they're going to have good boilerplates to send you to help guide you. Okay. And with that said, we've got 15 minutes for questions. I'm going to turn on my video and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think stop sharing. Okay, great. So you guys can see me now. And I just want to ask, is there any questions that I can answer for anybody? Does anybody want to run a scenario by me? Our group is small enough so that, I can maybe focus a little bit more on anything that you guys have an interest in or a question about. And of course, if you don't have any questions, that's fine too. So any questions, anything in particular I can assist anybody with? Great. Nothing. Oh, Julie, go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh, no, Julie, I'm sorry. That was my hand that was up, not your hand. I'm sorry. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Great. So, please, you guys have my information, Truc Moore with the County Counsel's Office. You can find me at tlmoore@council.lacounty.gov. And you can absolutely reach out. I'm a resource. Oftentimes, I've got folks across the board reaching out, asking questions, looking for boilers. Oftentimes your county councils are reaching out, asking me questions on the side. So please, don't be afraid to reach out. We're here to be a resource. And IT contracting is a big thing, guys, at the county, because we, truthfully, everything these days is all software related. Everything is automated. Everything is AI, right? So it's really important that, we have a good working understanding of how we contract for IT and what needs to be in our procurements and agreements. Okay. Fantastic, everyone. Thank you. Wonderful, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Truc. Appreciate it. I'm gonna drop some flyers of future events that we're hosting for May, since it's API Heritage Month and as well as Mental Health Awareness Month. So in the chat, I'm gonna try to drop it, and we will have this recording up hopefully soon. on our YouTube channel. I think that because we didn't get to record last session, unfortunately, it didn't come through. But hopefully this will at least be up there. Okay. All righty. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.